nice groove going right there, isn't
Lit.
Very nice group, Johnny Allen. So I'm just checking in. Aisha confirming that you're all set, ready to go, fired up, ready to continue conversation we've been waiting to have for quite some time. I am Felicia Hall Allen, co-founder of A Step Up.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome, A Step Up fam, Next Level fam, and head coaches, executive leadership family. Man, we got an exciting live conversation for you tonight. Conversation after dark. Felicia will tell you a little bit more about that, but want to bring you up to speed for some of you who might be just joining us. Our mission at A Step Up is to educate, to equip, inspire current and future generation of coaches. What we desire to do is to provide coaches with the insight similar to that of an executive leadership concepts to help aim and add to their ability to be more effective as coaches, as leaders, as managers, as teachers, and as mentors. And guys, it's been a phenomenal day. What a great way to cap off this conversation tonight, Felicia.
I think that what's so significant about tonight, we know that there are a number of people who are watching via the YouTube platform. And so we want to thank y'all for joining us as well. We started with a great coach this morning with Coach Kevin Eastman, who's an NBA champion. So it only seems fitting that we end the day with a conversation about the big man himself. I know you may think I'm talking about the big man up above, but he left a big man, brought a big man to earth who has a character, who had the character, charisma, personality that was larger and bigger than life. And Big John, Coach Thompson. And the two gentlemen who are going to be talking tonight, we decided to have a conversation after dark because we wanted as many people as possible to be able to tune in. This autobiography that they're about to discuss, I Came as a Shadow, is like none other that you've ever read. But the two gentlemen who are going to engage in this conversation are just fire when you begin to think about what their level of commitment has been to not just student athletes, but to the student who becomes the athlete. Because Big John Thompson was about being a teacher. And both of these men are teachers. So we have Dr. Leonard Moore, who will be facilitating the conversation with the collaborator, Jesse Washington, who was fortunate enough to be the one who was chosen to help carry the stories forward. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Leonard Moore. What these guys may not know is that in the session that was prior to this session, Dr. Julie Russo, who is the chair of the Black Lives Matter at the University of Southern Cal, said she had the good fortune and pleasure of attending the Black Student Athlete Summit at the University of Texas. And she said that she was able to do a whole lot of ear hustling around this conversation. And she said, my ears were burning up. And the level of insight, like Johnny spoke about, the level of insight relative to what leadership looks like in practice, she was like, y'all just don't know what you're in for. I'm going to introduce Dr. Leonard Moore. He is the executive director of the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Initiatives in the Office of the President and the George Littlefield Professor of American History at the University of Texas at Austin. No, Texas is not a historically Black college or university. It's a historically white college and university. So I don't know how they came up with that name, but they got it. He is a native of Cleveland, Ohio, and earned his BA from Jackson State University in the SWAC. He's got his PhD from The Ohio State University. He was a history professor at LSU. Just so many touch points with me, and I'm a Big Ten girl. I'm from the state of Louisiana and always loved Southern University and Grambling in the SWAC. What's up with that? He also is he was at LSU the director of the African American and African Studies Department and the Pre-Doctoral Scholars Institute. All of that just means that this is a smart brother. He has been at the University of Texas, I think, since, wow, 2018, Doc? 2007, Doc? 2007. Wow, that's more than a decade. And at UT, he teaches a class on the Black Power movement and a signature course titled Race in the Age of Rump. In the fall semester, he teaches more than 1,000 students across both of those classes. But one of the things that I'm really proud of is the fact that he not only is an author of 3 books on Black politics, The Defeat of Black Power, Civil Rights and the National Black Political Convention of 1972, Black Rage in New Orleans, Police Brutality and African American Activism from World War II to Hurricane Katrina, and Carl B. Stokes and the Rise of the Black Political Power in America. This brother is bad. I'm just honored to have you. I can't read everything because I would go on for another 5 minutes. And Johnny's like, Felicia, get to it. The conversation on I Came as a Shadow with Jesse Washington. But I hope you would talk a little bit more about the Black Student Athlete Summit as well and provide some perspective and insight. Jesse Washington, I have been in awe of the work that you're doing with the Undefeated. Excited to hear this conversation. Johnny and I will come back at the end of the conversation. Johnny, anything else you want to say before these brothers get underway?
Just thank you for being here, brother, and I'm excited about having you. So, without further ado, let's let you get into your conversation.
And hey, Doc, unmute your microphone so we can hear this brilliance coming through.
All right, Sister Allen and Brother Allen, thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do. You all are, as they say in the Bible, y'all are sowing seed on good ground. You all are really helping coaches develop. Your heart is in the right place. You aren't doing this for money. You aren't doing it for ego or for status or to get followers. I believe you're just doing it because that's what God has called you to do. So on behalf of so many of us, we thank you for sharing your gift. Always good to be here. And Sister Allen, I tell people I'm just a brother from Jackson State University, a little country school, Jackson, Mississippi. They took a chance on a brother who barely finished high school, and I was able to make something of myself. I want to introduce our author, a big fan of mine, Jesse Washington. I met him several years ago at the Black Student Athlete Summit. He came down and covered it for 3 days with the Undefeated, and we broke bread. Just got to really love this brother. I love him as a person, and also I love his craft. He is a senior writer at the Undefeated. He spent some time covering race for the Associated Press. And if you're a hip hop head, he has a ton of street credibility. He was former managing editor of Vibe magazine and editor-in-chief of Blaze magazine. He's an Ivy League product, and he claims he can play basketball. And he's a proud member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. So, Jesse, appreciate you, brother. Good to see you again, man.
Man, great to be here with you, Doc. Let's do it.
Whenever I'm in Jesse's presence, I just need to kiss the ground. But
oh, come on, wait. Just for the record, you got more degrees, more books, more everything than your boy, more titles. So you doing all right. I'm just happy to be here with you.
Appreciate you, man. And so, you know, you had this amazing opportunity to collaborate with John Thompson on his autobiography. And to me, it's like, I don't know what it was like when you got the call, but I want to know what it was sort of probably like when Malcolm called Alex Haley and like, man, can you come write this for me? As a historian, Jesse, I'm big on details. Tell us what the phone call or the email was like when you first, when he picked you to help him write this autobiography.
Right. So he had folks working for him and his children were setting things up. He had a literary agent. He had his agent, David Falk, who was involved in the process. And so I was sort of vetted out, and then I get to go to his house. And so I get the address, I show up, and it's not some big palatial type of situation. And I came to understand that Coach Thompson wasn't really about that. He was wealthy, but didn't flaunt it. He was really just a guy from around the way who liked nothing more than just be sitting around with the fellas, chopping it up. And so I went to his house, which was modest, and his son, John III, was there, and his daughter, Tiffany, was there. And they commenced to giving your boy somewhat of a grilling. It was a polite grilling, but they were like, what's he all about? Can I get along with him? And had some pretty stiff questions for me. you know? And so I tried to present myself as honestly as possible. And I really wanted to do it. You know, I mean, I was very intently aware of the opportunity and the historical significance. And to be the one to tell this story that had never been told and is so crucial and so important, you know, I really felt a strong desire to go after that. And I'm glad that they chose me. What
were some of the toughest questions they asked you, man?
Yeah, he said, "You've never written a book like this before. What makes you think you can do mine?" And then he would look at me kind of like this. He would go, you know, he would tilt his head down and give you a stare that went right through you. And he's really evaluating every aspect of your response, your body language, what you say, how fast, if you stumble. You know, that was the impression that I got. And he was a teacher, you know, and so I felt it a little bit like I was being called on in class to answer a question. But I was prepared. You know, I had done my homework and my research. I had read a lot of stuff beforehand. There was only one biography written of Coach Thompson, which I read in preparation and was outraged by it and the misrepresentations that were in it. And so I was prepared, but that was the toughest question. And then his son said, you know, we're a Nike family over here. Why are you wearing Adidas? And I said, hey, I wear size 13 and an XL. So, you know, if you want to help a brother out, then, you know, we good.
Right. So at what point did you realize you had passed the test?
It was probably almost a year into the process of writing the book, because once we started writing it, it was very clear that if things didn't go as coach wanted them to go, if he didn't like the work, if he didn't like me, you know, sort of like you may start the first game of the season, right, but you know, middle of the season, you might play your way right out of that spot. And so I think it was part of his innate teaching and coaching tactics to really, he didn't say it in a disrespectful way. He didn't say, if I don't like it, I'm gonna fire you. But it was just, let's see how it goes. 4 sessions in, I, you know, remarked trying to get an answer out of him or something. I said, yeah, you don't trust a lot of people, coach. He said, don't trust a lot of people. I don't trust you. And he looked me dead in my eye. Dead in my eye.
What was he like on the inside? Because he had a real hard exterior, like a lot of black men of that generation. But what was he like, man, when you got to sort of peek behind the veil?
Right. Behind the veil was someone who was primarily interested in intellectual pursuits, in thinking, in talking about important topics and breaking it down in all of its complexities and angles. And he, you know, credit to David Aldridge, who, you know, covered Coach extensively and knew him quite well. And he remarked rather recently that Coach wanted to see how you thought and why you thought what you thought. So he would interrogate a lot of my, you know, my assumptions. It was my job. And I think that when I won him over was that I didn't just show up and say, okay, coach, what do you want to say? I showed up prepared with questions, topics, games. Okay, when this happened, why was that important? And I put the work in. I read a lot of articles. I would bring the article and say, oh, this article said you busted into the locker room and yelled at the ref. And he said, yeah, I went in there and called him a handkerchief head nigger. You know? And so then coach said, yeah, Jesse, you know, you're not lazy, you know? So what he was like was he wanted to dig into these things and talk about them and analyze them and figure them out. And a lot of these things he was figuring out, he was applying himself to really saying, okay, this is the proclamation that I'm going to make about this. And he had to figure out what he wanted to say. So overall, behind the scenes, he was an acutely and extremely intellectual person, you know, and you don't think of Big John Thompson as that. You think of him as an athlete, of a teacher, of a leader. And he was all these things, but above all, I believe he was an intellectual.
So, you know, so Jess, you know, we're on here as a part of the Head Coaches Executive Leadership Academy. Why is it important that head coaches, all head coaches and aspiring head coaches read this book, I Came as a Shadow?
Oh, man. Well, I think the first thing is just to have the historical knowledge and the appreciation and the perspective on what it took for example, in this particular hiring cycle, so many Black coaches to get opportunities. You know, I consider myself a fairly well-read individual and a student of the game, and I love basketball. And I am somewhat embarrassed to say that before I started working on this book, I had never heard the name John McClendon before. So for those of you who are saying right now, oh, who's John McClendon? Don't feel bad, you know, but this book will tell you exactly who he was and why it's so crucial for us to not only to study who John McClendon was, you know, and what he did, because, you know, there's aspects of what went on with him that are still relevant today. So that's the number one reason why people should read this book. And number two, Coach Thompson, it's not an accident that he was successful. So he has so many practical examples of how to be successful as a coach. You know, for example, 70% of success in coaching has nothing to do with basketball, but that 70% determines whether you win or lose. And then he'll break it down. This is part of the 70%. This, all the details in his approach was proven to work. You know, and it spans era. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is just the brother was hilarious. Yeah. I mean, he was just funny and entertaining and would say stuff that would just knock me over. And so it's not a chore to read this book. It sounds like he's talking to you. And that you know, that was how we delivered it. So those are three reasons.
I mean, I know, man, when you sent me the text, I didn't even know you were working on the book, man. You kept that thing under wrap big time. And, you know, and I remember, man, that you sent me that advanced copy. I read that thing in about a day and a half, man. So it, you know, when people get the book, you know, it is very clear that John Thompson, like a lot of Black professionals of his era, carried the burden of race. It's like he walked around with it. He never let it go. You know what I mean? And even some of his critics would say, man, you need to let some of that stuff go. How much did that affect him?
Man, I think it affected him every day. And I think that he didn't shy away from that. You know, and I remember it was towards the end of the work on the book. So we're almost 2 years into this, and he got on one. You know, Coach was just letting loose, and he was like, "Yeah, they said, oh, John walks around with a cloud over his head. John makes everything was racial. God damn it, everything was racial."
Wow, yeah,
like that's an exact quote. So we took the "God damn it" out of the book because he didn't want to curse too much in it. You know, but it was like, how could it not be for someone who was born into segregation in Washington, D.C., for someone whose father could not read or write, but was extraordinarily intelligent, you know, for somebody who was not allowed to play in certain tournaments in high school, for someone who saw some of the best players that he had ever played against cut from the Celtics because they had a quota on the amount of Black players. Like, and then to flip it around and try to say that he was discriminating against, that he was the racist. Like, so how could it not be, you know? So I think he carried that every day, but he embraced it. He didn't say, oh, woe is me. He was like, okay, this is what y'all made me carry. And y'all are the ones who did this. So I'm going to tell you how it really is. I'm not going to back down from it. I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm going to embrace it and change things. So, you know, it was funny, man. One time, early on, he was like, yeah, I don't want the book to just be all about race. And then his son, John, was like, yeah, Daddy said that he didn't want to be all about race. And that's all he talked about, right? You know, so he was a race man, to use the old parlance, right? He was a race man, and he cared. I mean, it all came from the fact that he cared about others. He cared about Black people. So it was that was the lens through which he saw the world.
And Jesse, you talk in the book that, you know, he gets hired at Georgetown in 1972, has this great career. But you write that he says he never felt accepted at Georgetown. How was that possible? Yeah, was that just his own imposter syndrome, or was he just playing like, I mean, how was he not, why did he believe he wasn't accepted at Georgetown?
He said until the end of his career. So he said, well, after I won the national championship, I didn't really feel fully welcome. And, you know, I think he knew that a lot of people resented him. You know, I think that there were a lot of people who resent him. There's people who still resent him.
Even at Georgetown?
Yeah, even at Georgetown, people resented his influence. I'm sure they resented his money because he was not apologetic about, you know, hey, the money is mine. I earned it. That's, you know. And so, yes, I am the highest paid coach that in Nike's stable of coaches, you know. And so, I think that there was a significant amount of resentment among a great deal of alumni. I think that people, his refusal to be apologetic extended to the style of his players on the court. And they were the most physical, aggressive, bunch of dudes that in college basketball at that time. And a lot of people didn't like that. They wanted them to play a genteel style. And why is there scuffles? Why are you getting in fights? And so those people resented him being there. They resented his influence. They resented the fact that his team was all black. You should recruit more white kids. And so these are the factors. But I think that one of the main people who made him feel welcome was the current president of Georgetown University, Jack DeGioia, who he knew as an undergrad and befriended as an undergrad. And it's a rather touching story in the book. They had a Athletes in Action meeting, or a Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting, and the freshman Jack DeGioia and Coach Thompson were the only two people who showed up. And then Coach came back the next week. Pretty interesting. So, I don't find it hard to believe when you hear Coach talk about the resistance that he received from professors, or the implication that he was trying to intimidate people or get his way, then you understand why he didn't fully feel welcome and why there was so much resentment about his success and about his mere presence and his players' presence on that campus.
Let me ask you this. Sometimes now, Jesse, you hear some coaches say, the interview the brother had at North Carolina was a complete embarrassment, where they asked him, how does it feel to be UNC's first black coach? And he says something about, well, my wife was white. It's like, come on, Hubert Davis, you can do better than that. How do you think Big John would respond to these coaches? Talking about who put raisins in a potato salad? He put raisins in a potato salad. How do you think Big John would respond to some coaches who say, well, I'm not a black coach. I'm just a coach who happens to be black.
Right. How he would respond publicly would be, well, I think that this brother may need to widen his horizons. Privately, there'd be a whole lot of cussing and a whole lot of this thing over here, because Coach would lay it on you, But he also was, I think he would be really disappointed. I think he would think that those people were delusional. I think that, he would be disappointed in anybody shying away from the obvious, and Coach says it, but don't tell me you don't see, he said, look, when I first see you, I see your color. If you're a white guy, I see a white person. And that's based upon my experiences in the country. Now, once I get to know you, you can become colorless. But don't act like when you don't walk up and see me, you don't see a big black man, because that's who I am.
A 6'10" black man too, right?
A 6'10" black man who unapologetically black, before the term was in vogue. So I think he would really be disappointed in that. And I think that he would, Coach Thompson suffered no fools, including our fellow black people, and he would call us out in a minute. And so I think that that's how he would deal with that. And, the Hubert Davis thing, I think was an example, of, Coach had a lot of critiques of the current generation of coaches, and I think that, I'm not sure what Brother Hubert was trying to get over with that, but it was just, it didn't show a fluency and a comfortable and an understanding of how these topics are supposed to be dealt with in a conversation. And sure, there's, it's fine to have a white wife, but that doesn't belong in the same sentence with, I'm proud to be the first black coach at the University of North Carolina.
But Jesse, in their defense, I think what some black coaches would say, well, Thompson built that program from the ground up. He was synonymous with Georgetown, so he could do whatever the hell he wants to do. I'm new. One of my boys just got hired at Wichita State, the head men's basketball coach, Isaac Brown. And so I think they would say, man, I can't be out there like him because I haven't won nothing.
Great point. Yeah. So one of the things that Coach Thompson emphasized in his book was, so him and Jesse Jackson, which is a fascinating part of the book, went at it like this. Jesse Jackson is boycotting Nike. Coach Thompson, Michael Jordan, Spike Lee are on the other side. There's a scene with them in a hotel room in New York, is great. But Coach Thompson said that years later, he ran into Jesse at a game, and Jesse came over and was like, I respect you because you did it when you had something to lose.
Wow.
Everybody can step up when they good and got tenure. And really, let's be honest, in this environment, in this coaching environment, very few coaches ever get to that point of ultimate tenure. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can count them on one hand, white or black. And so, are we going to speak up and do what's right when we have something to lose?
No, that's a good point, Jesse. You know, when I was in my VP role at Texas, I kept a slip of paper on my desk. It had 3 names written on it: Joe Paterno, Bobby Knight, and Mac Brown. All right. And people said, Dr. Mo, why you? I said, because if those guys can get fired, I can get fired. You know what I'm saying? And so I think the times are different, but like I said, he had that luxury of building that program up. And basically,
right, but let me ask you a question though.
Go ahead.
And how did you still, and I think this is instructive for the people who are watching this call, how did you still speak truth to power, even with the knowledge that you could get fired?
Because, Jesse, I've never been attracted to titles. I've been attracted to impact, influence, mission, purpose. You know, I didn't grow up wanting to be a VP or college. No, I'm a professor, man. I like going in the classroom with 1,000 students. I like putting 80 students on the plane in the summer, study abroad in South Africa, or take them to China. That's who I am at my core. And so I think the challenge is John never allowed his core to get messed up. You know, it seemed like he was so my dad was born in 1934 in Indianapolis. And so my mom was, my grandmother was valedictorian, Christmas Addicts High School, 1930, which at the time was the best high school in the country. But my dad wasn't a radical by any means. When the tournament would come out, when the brackets would come out, Jesse, he would say, watch, they're gonna put all the black coaches in the same bracket. Walt Hazard, Cheney, John Thomas, you know, Raveling, Nolan Richardson, and he said they're gonna knock each other out. Do you think the present day coach, before we get back to John, do you think the present day coaches have that same level of race consciousness, or are they only race conscious when their immediate security is being threatened?
I think some of them do. You know, I see some of them definitely out there. Coach Capel at Pitt is very outspoken, and he's outspoken, and he's not in a very ultra secure, coaching situation right now. He hasn't won yet. He's trying to turn a program around. And so I think some of them are race conscious. I think those of them who have it in their DNA are more inclined towards that. And also, I'm not against it when people have an awakening later and decide, I haven't, for example, I work at the Undefeated, and a couple of years back, we had a big scoop. Michael Jordan wrote a letter talking about, I can no longer stay silent, no longer, acknowledging he was silent. But I'm glad he's with it now. I'm glad he's with it now. So for those coaches who may read Coach Thompson's book and say, you know what, I haven't been doing enough. I have to be more vocal. I have to do something when I have to lose. I don't begrudge anybody that journey and that evolution. So I think some of them are race conscious, but we definitely need more.
Let me say this before we pivot back to John. I want to stay here. Somebody put something in the chat. I interviewed Dawn Staley on a show about a month ago. And I said, Dawn, it seems to me that you have now become the official spokesperson for the defunct Black Coaches Association. And the point I made is that it seems like the Black women are much more outspoken and courageous. And here's my hypothesis. I could be 100% wrong, but I doubt it. I believe Black women realize that they will never make it to the club. Never, no matter what they do. But I wonder sometimes if brothers feel like, that, well, if I just put my head down and work hard, I'll get accepted. So how do we get to a point where, Dawn Staley is in many ways the voice of African-American coaches?
Yeah. So how do we get to that place? I think Coach would say, because she won. And Coach is acutely aware of, and he says in his book, I would not have had the impact that I did. I had to win.
Yeah.
I had to win. I had to win to keep my job. I had to win to get the voice that I had, and I had to win to do things my way. So Coach Staley has won. But it is very important to note that on the women's side of basketball and extending that out into the WNBA, the Dream might have helped turn Georgia blue.
Right.
So extending, the women are really representing. I think I think your hypothesis is correct. In addition to that, I would say that there's less money over there. So there's less to get them distracted. And if I'm a coach and I'm making, you know, $1 million a year, and I'm with the promise of a long career, and then you want to win and to compete at the highest level. And so it's hard to do things that might rock the boat in that respect. Whereas the women, there's less money involved in terms from the players, the coaches, everybody. So I think that casts it in a different light.
Okay. Let me just get back to John now. Now the woke folks, they're not gonna like this. You know, they love, because I'm 50. I ain't cool no more, Jess. I'm gonna be 50 this summer.
I'm right there with you.
Okay. They love to talk about the black middle class and the politics of black respectability. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So you talk about how John had these brothers wearing ties. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Let's get to it. Keep going. Keep going.
Can you talk about that a little bit, Jesse?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So yeah, the young woke folks and respectability politics. So I think that there's a severe misunderstanding of what this respectability politics is. Whereas what the actual definition of it is, I'm going to do something so white people will accept me. And so a couple people have looked at Coach Thompson's book and said, oh, you talking about wearing ties on the plane because you might sit next to somebody who could give you a job, and wearing ties to the banquet. And Coach Thompson loved that. He loved, you know, Coach Thompson putting on eyeglasses on purpose to project the intellectual image. He wasn't doing that for white folk. No, sir. He was doing it because that's what he thought was right. And that's what he valued. And that if he was hiring somebody for a job and the dude slouched up with his pants hanging down, he wouldn't want to hire him. Forget the white folks. He'd be like, if the nigga can't wear no belt, how am I gonna have him working for me?
Well, Jesse, the reason I say that, because I was at a women's game, and I'll just give the conference. I won't say the names of the team. In the Big East. All right.
Yep.
And this school invited me down for Black History Month. So I'm standing outside the home team locker room, you know, talking to the sisters before they go on the court. Now, sisters got tattoos all on the neck, everywhere. And I'm like, isn't it the job of the head coach to prepare these young men and women to be successful when they hit the marketplace? But I don't see that anymore. But what they'll say, Jesse, is, well, Doc, man, you know, if I start telling stuff like that, then other coaches will use it and recruit against me. How would John deal with that question now? How would he deal with the tattoos and all that stuff now?
I asked him about that.
Okay.
And he said, I would have adjusted to it the same way I adjusted to afros, the same way I adjusted to long shorts, but adjust, not bow down, because there's a limit to things. There's a reasonable way to express yourself. So coach would have said, look, you know, when you go to the job interviews, just have tattoos, but just, you know, have business tattoos. When you go to the job interview, it's not all over the place like that. Or he would really challenge these young people. What is it that you want to do? I mean, I think it really starts there. Okay, when you're done playing basketball, what do you want to do? Okay, now, is your current presentation, if you get these tattoos, is that going to hinder you from doing that? Well, yes, it will. And it may be right or wrong, but some people are going to see that and you will have less opportunity. So I think he would have approached it that way. He wouldn't have prohibited it. One of the funniest conversations in the book was about cornrows and braids, which he called plaits. And it took me a minute to figure out what he was talking about. Right. You know? And so he would have, and at the same time, and this speaks to his contradictory nature, I think that the Allen Iverson that we saw become this iconoclastic icon in the NBA, I think that was partly because he was empowered to be who he wanted to be by watching Coach Thompson be who he wanted to be, you know? But I don't think that Coach Thompson engaged in any sort of respectability politics. And I think that there is absolutely a responsibility of head coaches to learn how to communicate with their players in a way that will help them make good decisions. You know,
you brought up communication. This is where I have issues with a lot of coaches. Coaches talk to kids crazy nowadays, man. You know what I'm saying? And if I were to talk to students the way coaches talk to their student athletes, man, I'd get fired, run out of there, Title IX officer, whatever. Now, John coached hard, man. Why? I mean, how can he be a father figure on one end, but then he's yelling at guys, cussing at them? And I just wonder, did he talk about that at all?
Yes. He said, I tried to, two things. Number one, he said, I tried to never curse somebody out who didn't know I loved them. So you have to establish the relationship first. And number two, he learned this from Red Auerbach. You can't coach everybody the same way. Some guys can take it and some guys can't. And so sometimes he's going to send a message like Michael Jackson told me, yeah, coach cursed me out all the time. And, you know, and it didn't bother me. I could take it. And sometimes he was trying to curse out Reggie Williams, but he would curse out Michael Jackson because Reggie was, I mean, these are facts. The same way Red Auerbach didn't yell at Bill Russell, he yelled at Tommy Heinsohn. You know what I'm saying? And then coach said, yeah, when he wanted to get a message across to Russ, he'd be like, yo, I rebound the ball. You got to rebound the ball. And yeah, you too, Russ. So it's an emotional intelligence. And I think that this is what the coaches have to have. It's an emotional intelligence. And it goes beyond just yelling. You know, I have a son who plays Division I basketball. I have a daughter who's headed there. They've been coached by a lot of different people. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of Black coaches in their coaches through high school and AAU and college. And there's just a way, you know, your ability to relate to the kid and to motivate them and to reach them is how you are really going to succeed as a coach, to get kids to buy in, to get kids to do things that they might have seen themselves of even being capable of. And that's what Coach Thompson was able to do. You know, I saw the way he did it with me in writing the book, the way he would praise certain things. Oh, Jesse, yeah, you're not lazy. You work hard, you know, boom. Yeah. Now I'm going even harder for you. You know, man, this is good. You know, like, I like this. You're doing a good job, boy. Like, so he was coach.
Jesse, did he regret the way he talked to guys sometimes?
He did.
Back over his career.
He didn't, he did say, I went too far sometimes. And he said specifically in his book, I said some things I shouldn't have said, you know? And so he recognized that, but he also was a product of his era. You know, he was a product of his era. And I think that there's a different understanding now and the paradigm has changed. And you know, and a lot of these coaches are coaching on eggshells right now because the kid might transfer right after the game. You know?
They got to recruit him every day. You're right. You got
to recruit him every day. So I've asked a couple of head coaches recently, can you still coach kids hard? And the coach that I asked said, well, you have to coach them different. So, you know, I think Coach Thompson would still be coaching kids hard. He would still be demanding. He would still let the kids know that he loved them. And you got to prove that, man. These kids know when they're being used. They know when they're being exploited and when you don't really care. You know, every coach says, yeah, I love my guys. I love my guys. But you got to show it. So that's what it is.
Let's talk about Prop 42 for a minute, you know, the academic. Because I remember, you know, when the NCAA came out with, you know, these new academic requirements, a lot of Black educators, Jesse, liked it because they felt that these basketball and football powerhouses were pimping out these kids.
And they were.
And so take us through the debate where John Thompson, you know, he has this infamous protest, but a lot of Black educators were upset at him because they felt, no, these universities should have higher standards. You just can't pimp our young men and women out for athletic purposes.
Absolutely. So it's a complex situation. And Arthur Ashe was the most prominent opponent of John Thompson in this Prop 42 thing. So, you know, they said if you don't have a 700 on the SAT, then you can't get a scholarship. Before you could come to college and get your grades up and then go. So obviously this is going to impact, you know, have a vastly disproportionate impact on the Black student athlete. So I think that the Coach Thompson saw and the sort of the beacon that he shone was, this is how you engage with these kids and don't exploit them. Because I'm insisting that you get an education if you come here. If you come here with a 650, you are going to graduate or get out. That's because I will not, here's the quote that he said over and over. If you want to be a slave, I won't be the master. If you're going to come here and just get pimped out, I'll get rid of you. But there's too many people who were and are just willing to use them. I find it fascinating that he called attention to the cultural bias inherent in these tests. The fact that you're using a standardized test to judge athletes when they're not receiving a standard level of education. Man, I think I read in the newspaper just today that the whole University of California educational system with SATs done. If you take it and send us a score, we ain't gonna look at it. you know what I mean? And I believe that there is a group, the Racial Justice or the Racial Equity Committee for the NCAA basketball coaches led by Tommy Amaker have recommended that the NCAA not require student athletes to take the SAT anymore. Wow. So Coach was ahead of his time in saying, this is a biased instrument.
Absolutely.
I personally have mixed feelings about it. Mm-hmm. I think that used appropriately as one measure, it's a positive thing for students, period, let alone student athletes, to challenge themselves with a test.
Yeah.
You know, and so but the thing is that you can't really trust these institutions and these organizations to use it appropriately.
Funny story, man. When I was still at LSU, and I had a good time there. And, you know, as quiet as kept, man, those people, I think for the most part, did the right thing. I was holding them accountable. But when they built, Jesse, this brand new football facility, it was like on a different part of campus. Do you know, man, this is crazy that I saw the architectural drawings of this facility. Do you know that on the initial drawings, they had classrooms and they were going to have academic classrooms inside the football facility because the football coach at the time said, when he wakes up in the morning, all he wants to see is football players. And they felt it would be more, listen to this nonsense. It would be more convenient just to have the football players in that facility from sunrise to sunset. But we shut that down real quick.
Man,
I'm saying some schools need some kind of safeguard or else you'll get all kind of chaos like that. Let's switch gears and talk about the drug dealer in American culture. And one of the most infamous drug dealers, Rayful Edmonds. Right. I only heard about Rayful Edmonds because I was at Jackson State, one of my boys from DC, and he was talking about Rayful Edmonds like this was Jesus. So take us into the connection between this prominent drug dealer in DC and his relationship with John Thompson.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this is the thing that people ask about the most when they hear about the book. Is he going to talk about Rayful Edmonds? So you have to go back. I'm 51. So in our era, this was the first era of crack kingpins becoming celebrities, right up there, probably bigger than the rappers. Mm-hmm. So I was from New York, upstate New York, and knew who Rayful Edmonds was because his word, these were they were celebrities. Mm-hmm. And so this guy was one of the biggest cocaine dealers on the East Coast. And I don't know if anybody's watching this show, Snowfall, which is brilliant. John Singleton's last work. About how the CIA was pumping crack in the hood and helped, fuel the crack explosion. Mm-hmm. And so he was on that level, making $1 million a week or something like that. And he starts hanging out with Coach Thompson was finishing up at the Olympics. And one of his players was from DC and had grown up down the block from Rayful. Mm-hmm. And that was Alonzo Mourning's roommate. And Alonzo is, in Coach's words, a country bumpkin from Virginia. Up in the big city, out at the nightclub, at the summer league game, going out to eat. Like, yeah, I'm living the life with the biggest celebrity in DC. And meanwhile, Rayful is 23, 24 years old. He's like, I'm with the Georgetown basketball players. And Alonzo as a freshman was like Zion as a freshman. He was that level. And so, after he gave Alonzo the what for and had his old big self in tears, he put the word out, Rayful, come to my office. And Rayful was sort of shook because he knew he messed up. And it wasn't like, and it was fascinating to hear Coach work his way through it. And by the way, Coach didn't give me the whole Rayful story until probably a year and a half into us working together because he wanted to make sure that he was going to keep me around. Right. So he wasn't going to give up the goods. And so to hear him work his way through it and to explain that it was a level of respect that Rayful Edmonds had for Coach Thompson. And they were from the same type of neighborhoods. They knew the same people. They went to the same boys club. And Rayful loved basketball. He loved basketball. And he had a crew around him. They would go and play pickup and things like that. And he would leave his drug house and go play ball in DC all day. And so, he told him, hey, I need to see that boy. Bring him to my office. And the fact that coach could make one phone call to one person and make that happen,
Wow.
like, you know, and it wasn't even a phone call into the criminal element either. It was just, I knew people who knew him. One of the most profound things that he said during this whole thing was that this drug is having an effect on our community, and these drug dealers, they are our neighbors' children. So that level of compassion, not acceptance, but compassion and understanding for the community, and, you know, I think speaks to the unique way that he dealt with these things. Like, if that had his career could have ended with that. Absolutely, he could have lost his job if it had gotten out in the wrong way, that there was this association. And you know the newspapers wanted to put that out, but he was able to meet with Rayful and put an end, if not immediately, then quickly, to the association and save his program, save Alonzo Mourning's career. I mean, unbelievable.
You know what, Jesse? I don't think a lot of head coaches, particularly, I mean, any level, realize just the status that they have. Sometimes, man, when I want to act important, I got some nice UT Longhorn coaching gear in my closet. I typically put it on when I'm driving on the highway late at night. All right. But sometimes if I'm going like to a big football game or Houston or Dallas basketball game, I'll just walk in fashionably late. And guess what will happen, Jesse? It's like the Red Sea will part, because people will just assume I'm on the coaching staff. And it seems to me that John understood the platform he had, particularly in urban communities. Do you think present day coaches realize in many ways the status? And I'm talking to white coaches. Now, do white coaches realize that a white head coach is probably the only person that could show up on the south side of Chicago, go down the street, and not get touched, and people will say, "Can I help you?" You know what I'm saying? Do they realize in many ways the platform that they have?
I think they realize it only from an influence perspective. I don't think that they do as good a job as they should of realizing it from an influence perspective, you know, and from an opportunity perspective and a responsibility perspective. You know, Coach Thompson knew that he had a responsibility that came along with this prominence, that he couldn't get up there and just be Big John. Across the park is what they call in DC. Across Rock Creek Park that's where Georgetown is and all the white folks. He felt responsible for everybody else. And so I think that these coaches and a lot of white head coaches have to realize our enterprise, my livelihood, is really built on extracting talent from these Black neighborhoods. And so what is my responsibility to those neighborhoods beyond, oh, I'm giving this kid an opportunity to get an education, you know, all that, because it goes beyond that. There's a fiscal responsibility. I mean, I'll give an example. I was doing some work recently in Minneapolis about George Floyd and stuff like that. And they've built a tremendous living memorial to George Floyd and other victims and to the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of the people around there said, "Hey, man, y'all coming in here doing your stories.
Wow.
You go and write your stories and got your cameras and make your movies. And then what are you doing for the community?" And I was like, seriously? And I felt and I said, okay, what can I do? So I think that these coaches have to ask the high school coaches, get re-engaged with the high school coaches, the community center directors, the people who are out there dealing with young people, not for money or to run an AAU program. When we were in Minneapolis, it was Phelps Community Center. And we went over there after school, and there were simultaneously a basketball, football, and baseball practice going on. And none of those coaches were trying to get scholarships for these kids. It was an activity. So I think that these coaches have to look and say, what is my responsibility to them?
Jesse, a couple years ago, man, I was invited to go to the Final Four in San Antonio. There's a group that was doing something with like assistant head coaches, similar to what Sister Allen and Brother Allen are doing.
Wait, put a pin in that for a minute.
Yes.
How I get to, like, can I carry your suitcase on some of these trips? So far in this call, we've been to the Final Four. We've been invited to the game over to the Big East game over here. Like, you know, you need a valet, my brother. Like what?
So, man,
okay, we had the Final Four. Okay.
It was Easter Sunday. And, you know, I tell people I'm saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, all of that. So for me to give up Easter Sunday to go talk to these coaches, and we just developed a heated discussion because I asked them, here's what I asked them. It's like 40 of them in there. I said, how many of you all require your kids to get an internship? Not a single hand went up.
Man,
and so
they require them to be at practice.
One of the assistant coaches from the Big East, UConn, he said, man, Doc, they don't want to do that. I said, they don't want to get up at 5 a.m. and do meaningless exercises either. But you make them do it. So how did Big John prepare these kids for life after sports?
Man, so, and this didn't make the book, but Fred Brown, right? Champion, the GOAT turned into the champion. He gave the ball away at the end of the North Carolina game to James Worthy. And then the 2 years later, they came back and won it. And he played great against Houston for the win. I heard some sort of conversation during the writing of this book, and they were like, yeah, and Fred Brown was, he was a bike messenger in the summer. And I was like, he was a bike messenger. He was like, yeah, Coach Thompson required everyone to have some sort of job connected to a real office.
Wow.
Like you couldn't go be like work at a summer camp as a basketball counselor. You had to have a job that put you in an office, and that was his requirement. Mm-hmm. And so that was how his whole thing was about, what are you doing after you're finished with basketball? Yeah. That was his whole thing. And numerous players told me that sometimes he would stop practice and they would talk for an hour, 2 hours or more about things that had nothing to do with basketball.
And Jesse, that's not happening now. My daughter plays Division I basketball at a small private school in San Antonio, Incarnate Word. They compete in the Southland Conference.
Right.
When we were going on recruiting visits, I don't ask about no playing time, no position. She'll take care of that. I asked one question. Mm-hmm. What is the commitment like in the summer? Mm-hmm. And one coach from the Sun Belt said, oh, we got the girls here, all summer long. They take a couple classes, work out. I'm like, to myself, wrong answer. But it's like the summers are being wasted.
This is such an important topic to me. So I have a son who plays Division I. He's at Drexel University.
Okay.
Drexel has a tremendous co-op program where you can get college credit for just going to a job. Wow. They got huge industries in Philadelphia, but the basketball schedule is not set up and like to let these people take advantage of this. And they're the most famous Black men on campus. Drexel doesn't have a football team, and so people will be begging to have them come work there.
Right.
But, now part of it is, I will say, if my son forced the issue, then, perhaps then, he hasn't forced the issue because that's what he likes to play basketball. You know what I'm saying? But like, to your point, he don't want to get up at 5 a.m. Force him, require him. Right. But, these coaches, they get a grasp of that brass ring and they want to hold on to it. And I believe that a lot of it is control, and that the more, like to your point with the LSU football facility, the more they can keep those athletes right there on, up under their thumb, then the better they feel, when really that is not conducive to truly educating them. So I would urge all the coaches that Coach Thompson always talked about informal education, the education you get in college when you're not in class. Absolutely. And you gotta let them out. I feel that that's really part of your responsibility.
And head coaches, we asking y'all to do better. You can't expect an 18-year-old to come to your program and go completely against the grain if everybody else is in the gym all summer. You have to, in many ways, say this is how our program is going to run. And let me say this to the head coaches. A lot of the stuff y'all doing is diminishing returns. You're only doing all that stuff because your mentor did it. And these kids have tearing ACL injuries. These kids are burnt out. And the main issue is that, coach, these coaches, they don't have any other interests. Many of them don't take vacations. They don't spend time with their spouses. They at their daughter's birthday party on their phone, texting a 16-year-old. And so all this pressure, if that coach is, trying to get up from a mid to a mid-major, so all the pressure the coach places on him or herself gets passed down to the 18 and 19-year-old. And this is why, and I'm on my soapbox, this is why, I'm sorry, I got some teenagers running around here.
Tell it.
The white walk-on who never plays always comes out with multiple job offers, and the brother or sister who filled up the arena or the stadium is always looking like, okay, what's next? And that more than anything, I'm not on pay for play. I'm not on name, image, and likeness. That's fine. My one concern Give the kids some opportunity so they can put something on their resume.
And speaking of the resume, there's this thing now, the grind, right,
Mm-hmm.
with basketball. And that means you have to devote every waking moment to basketball in order to make it. I actually saw, man, they were evaluating this kid, Imani Bates, who just decommitted, which is not a word in the dictionary, by the way. It was invented for people to leave their commitment to a scholarship. So he decommitted from Michigan State. And then the ESPN evaluator said, if I were him, and they, you know, there are some holes emerging in young boys' game.
Mm-hmm.
The ESPN story said, if I were him, I would devote every waking moment from now until the draft to filling the deficiency. And I'm like, he's 17.
17, that's right.
He's 17, and he's not going to play basketball forever. And so I would urge all the coaches, you know, in all of these sports to ensure that your players have something on their resume when they leave, because these kids play basketball all summer, so they can't have a job because I gotta be on the circuit to get a scholarship.
Right.
And then when they get to college, well, I got to be here to go to summer school, and I got lifting in the morning, and I got a workout in the afternoon, and then we scrimmage. So when do they get actual real world job experience? The coach has to make them do it.
And Jesse, here's my thing. If I'm in a major city and I need the guys to be there in the summer, okay, can't they go get an internship between 1 and 5 o'clock?
I'm saying, yes. Come on. You have to.
Let's switch gears and end on a happy note. And if you have a question, throw it in the chat. Let's talk about the cultural impact of the Georgetown Hoyas. And I'm thinking two phases. Number one, the blue and gray Hoya, Nike Dunks Hoyas, right? Then the other piece is the whole Allen Iverson. And it's funny how Big John was about, what they say, the respectability politics, although he didn't call it that. But, the Fab Five piece, that came from Georgetown. And
absolutely.
We don't have enough time to talk about Iverson's impact. So can you speak on that in a minute, the cultural impact of the Hoyas?
100%. They were the original squad, before UNLV, before the Fab Five. They were all of that. They laid down that blueprint as a bunch of brothers with black style, with black attitude, who would come in there and get up in that ass and beat you. And they had a style and a swag. The whole story about Coach Thompson and showing the contract to his players and saying, why haven't you guys asked me for any of this money, started with him trying to say, hey, man, everybody is looking at what y'all wear. People are giving you free stuff to wear because you guys are marketable and setting the agenda. And man, we were the same age when they came out, and Georgetown's style and swag was everything. And, it's a cliche and we've heard it before, but it's still amazing to think that pretty much most of the country thought Georgetown was an HBCU. You know what I'm saying? When it is anything but. It is anything but. So the cultural impact that they had, and really, quiet as kept, I think that most of it, or at least half of it, came from John Thompson on the sidelines and the image of Black leadership, Black manhood, Black intelligence, and Black strength, and unapologetic Blackness. And that wasn't even a term then. Did we use that then? I don't think we did.
No, not at all.
Unapologetic Blackness. That's what the swag was. And it was combined with hip hop was blowing up at this time. This was the introduction of hip hop into America and into mainstream culture. And so those two things came together and were sort of synonymous, because sneaker culture was part of hip hop and Georgetown had the hottest sneakers out with those dunks. And so it all came together into an attitude and a style that really predated the Fab Five and those guys.
Real question, last question before we get out of here, man. Close to getting out of here. You saw that Kobe's wife broke off the relationship between Kobe and Nike. Did John Thompson ever reevaluate his relationship with Nike? Because here's what I'm arguing, Jesse. The Black community has this this undying loyalty to Nike, and I don't know what Nike has ever done in the Black community. They've never put up a community center. I don't know what they have ever given back. And I remember, when the Jordans used to come out the Tuesday after the All-Star game. And I know like 10, 12 years ago, all these shoes, back in the day, Jesse, a new shoe would drop. you got this color gonna drop this week. The next week, this color gonna drop. So the pair you get on Monday become old 7 days later. So I'm just wondering, man, did he ever talk about, and we got some interesting question in the chat we'll get to. Did he ever talk about that at all?
I tried to go there a couple times. Coach wasn't having it. I tried, there's a number of places that Nike could be questioned. I mean, hey, I believe there is some court testimony in a couple of pending lawsuits that some of that Nike AAU money was paying some cats to go to college. You know what I'm saying? Like, we would be naive and I don't have any knowledge one way or another, but this is the fact, and there are some allegations being made.
Right. I
would sort of try to tiptoe up around this with Coach, and he, most of the time, he would just be like this. You got it? And he'd say, so you got a question?
Leave that alone. Yeah.
I do think that I mean, this man was on the board of directors of Nike from 1990 to the time of his death. Him and Phil Knight, shoot. Wow. I mean, I interviewed Phil Knight a couple times for the book on Coach's recommendation, and they loved each other. Phil Knight told me, period, I love John Thompson. And more than that, he respected him for the abilities that he brought. And he broke it down. This is what he brings to the board of directors in the direction of Nike. And it's not, oh, this is a hot shoe, So I think that Coach was aware of some of these contradictions. And I do think that Nike probably did more than we're aware of. And I think that Coach probably navigated them the same way that he navigated in that Nike chapter. He said Jesse Jackson had a point, but Nike was trying to do things also. Coach, one of the marks of extreme intelligence is the ability to hold conflicting ideas in your mind at one time. And it's not contradictory. It's not hypocritical. For example, Coach loved Red Auerbach, and there was a quota system, and Red Auerbach pushed the limits of the quota system, but still adhered to it. And Coach empathized with that. And Coach said, yeah, Red Auerbach, he couldn't free all the slaves at one time. And so sometimes you might disagree with it. And Coach had a lot of positions that I might disagree with. A lot of people disagree with him sending all his players to a white agent, David Falk, and his rationale for that. But Coach would interrogate you on that. He would listen to what you had to say. He would ask what evidence you had, and he would debate you on it. And then if he would change his mind, he probably wouldn't tell you.
So he would never let you win the argument.
I never won an argument with Coach at all. And then at one point he was just like, yeah, well, y'all Yale MFers, y'all think y'all know everything. I just went to Providence, so what do I know?
So this question from the chat, and it deals with, what about mentoring other coaches? You know what I mean? What did Coach think it was important for? What did Coach think it was important for younger coaches to learn? And did he mentor?
Yeah. He did mentor, and I think he was very receptive to I had a lot of young coaches say, yeah, when I went to Coach, he would tell me this and tell me that. Coach loved to sit around and talk and hold court at the Final Four. There's a lot of stories at the Final Four, actually. For many years, the journalist Bill Rhoden, shout out to the great Bill Rhoden, and Coach Thompson, Chaney, Nolan, and Raveling would gather all the Black coaches and journalists for a big dinner, and they would stay up till 3 a.m. That's mentoring, And so, and I was sitting with Coach when other coaches would call him to this day, be like, and I would hear him giving advice. I also heard him giving advice to a lot of his former players. I also saw him mentoring Patrick Ewing, in person. And so, and beyond mentoring, he would help people get jobs, and he says it in the book. I call Patrick Ewing and say, you should get this job. I mean, he said, nobody in the world except me thought that Patrick Ewing should be the head coach of Georgetown, including Patrick. So that was very important to him. And I
got a funny Chaney story. All right.
Yeah. Let me hear it.
So a good friend of mine, he applied for the athletic director job at Temple, right? And he said, so during the interview, he had to meet with Chaney. And this is a brother. He said, Chaney came in with a bag full of pig's feet. All right. And he said, Cheney offered him one, and Cheney said, man, do you know what this is? And the brother said, yeah, man, it's pig's feet. And he said it was just Cheney's way of seeing how if this dude was black or not, what I'm saying? But I just couldn't. Could you imagine being in a room with maybe Raveling, Cheney, Nolan Richardson, and John Thompson? I mean,
man,
that would be. I mean, that stuff would have been priceless. And I think a lot of coaches, whether you're black, white, or whatever, need to understand the perspective they came from. So as we close, Jesse, real question, man. Good last question. What are you working on now, man? What's next? What's the next project, Jesse Washington, or next big article you're working on?
Well, I just did a piece about the launch of the Basketball Africa League.
Yeah, and J. Cole has no business being on a roster. I'm sorry.
I'll give him his spot, but the point of my article was don't pay attention to the league because of J. Cole. Pay attention to the league because we done went to Africa and stole all their resources, their basketball resources, the same as we've stolen all their mineral resources. And this is finally time for them to get and develop their own thing. So pay attention for that. I'm working on a special for the Undefeated, which will be my directorial debut. We're going to have a 30-minute special coming out at the end of May as part of our Black History Always series.
Awesome.
So we refuse to be confined to February. So on the 29th of every month, just to remember that you tried to keep us to 28 days. On the 29th of every month in the year, we hit you with a TV special. And I'm privileged to direct one on Darnella Frazier, the young woman who filmed the death of George Floyd, the courageous 17-year-old Black girl who did what nobody else could do and changed the world. So that's my next project for the Undefeated, streaming on ESPN Plus on May 29th, Black History Always.
Brothers, sisters, Jesse Washington, I Came as a Shadow, the autobiography of John Thompson. Don't get the Kindle version. Buy 3 or 4 books and read it, and then let's pass them around. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jesse, man. We'll catch up. All right.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
I love it. Here's what I love. This is a great opportunity for all of us to be a part of changing the world. One brother or sister, one student athlete, one athletic program, and one community at a time. One of the things that stands out to me, I think I said earlier, Dr. Maya Angelou is one of my favorites. And she said, people don't care what you said. They don't care what you did. But John Thompson always had a way of making his and the people that he cared about feel like they mattered. And one of the things that Dr. Angelou said is that people never forget how you make them feel. Right. And they've never forgotten how Big John, Coach Thompson, made them feel like men and women who deserved a sense of dignity based on not how talented they were, but just the fact that they were who they were and that they were here was enough reason for them to have the capacity and the opportunity to dream. And I love what he did. And I am a Nike girl, so just do it.
So listen, man, brother Leonard, on the front end, you came in calling me saying, brother Johnny, I was taking that from a spiritual perspective.
Right.
But by the end of this session with you and brother Jesse, man, y'all brought the power. You brought the content, the historical context in a way that I think only you two could have done it. And for everyone that's listening, that will hear this tape, should be inspired to walk in their gift and their purpose, be woke in this era of social justice like no other. You guys have done a phenomenal job with bringing it and just having a conversation with brothers sharing. So thank you so much for bringing the fire tonight.
Jesse, thank you for using your gift. Our mission is to educate, connect, equip, and inspire current and future generations of coaches. Tonight, the both of you inspired all who have listened. So thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you want to know more about what Johnny and I are doing, follow us at A Step Up FHA or go to astepuplive.com. We wish you all the best with gratitude for your time tonight.
Y'all did a great job, man. Thank you so much.